Welcome, everyone, to today's podcast with Nicki Catchpole and me, Dave Smith, and our great guest, Tom Martin, CEO of Glance. Now, Tom has been a strategic leader seriously focused on CX, customer experience, and contact center for some time. So, welcome, Tom.
Dave, thanks for having me.
Awesome. As Nikki and I have been doing these podcasts, it's been great to have these conversations and glean insights from a diverse field of business leaders who have really been helpful in bringing a real life, experiential, and human focus to what we've been experiencing with COVID 19 and remote work, but also the lessons we're learning about the workplace in these times that I believe is fundamentally changing in real time how we do work, behaviors, and culture are being transformed right now. And so, Nikki, as we've discussed here on this podcast and offline, we're seeing some really interesting life, business, and work themes emerging in these calls. And I'm excited for our conversation today with Tom.
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, how much time do you have to kind of try to summarize what we've learned
Yeah.
by speaking with some of the great thought leaders who have been our guests over the past couple of months? And again, thank you, Tom, to echo what Dave said, for joining us today. Just to kind of harken back to some of the key themes that I was going over the past transcripts to pull out. Just in general, I mean, there's no doubt that before the pandemic, the world was in the process of moving up the digital transformation curve, moving to the cloud, becoming more collaborative, and embracing technologies like AI and blockchain and all those other great buzzword technologies that are now becoming increasingly less buzzwords and more technologies that people are pivoting to immediately. There was before the sentiment of acceleration at your own pace, and that dipping our toes into the water was okay. And I don't think we're toe dipping anymore, and that there's kind of more of a sink or swim mantra that has taken hold, and which has created some really unsettling dynamics, but also some really cool opportunities. So what we would like to start with, Tom, if you could begin with, how have you seen behavior shift? But I guess it's probably a bit more apt to start with what's the background of Glance before into how you've seen behavior shift. But if you could kind of merge those two as kind of an anchoring point for this discussion.
Sure, Nikki, thanks for having me as well. And from a background standpoint, Glance is an enterprise software company. We were founded just over a decade ago, and we're focused on visual engagement solutions for some of the world's largest brands. We enable their staff, whether it's a broker, advisor, or an agent, to meet their clients within a digital app, to see what they're looking at, to answer questions, present and deliver expert consultation, and guide them through to complete transactions. Some notable customers that we have are Intuit TurboTax and QuickBooks. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. Constant Contact, MindBody, along with many banks and financial companies who typically have policies that prohibit us from mentioning them by name. When you also ask the question around, what are we seeing change? I think for us, the knowledge and understanding of is all this sort of new, or are we really just sort of seeing a massive acceleration of some existing trends? I think it's the latter, but we are in a rare moment in history when there is so much change happening all at once. And the parts that we're starting to see that's really helping to fuel this is that in a world where there are some of these required changes imposed on all of us, things like face masks, social distancing, required to entering buildings and stores, suddenly also leads to the only way I can interface with this business is through one channel versus maybe the many channels. And of course, the biggest channel being I could walk into that building. And when you're suddenly forced into these swim lanes that may be just a singular swim lane, and you realize that having an accelerated familiarity, my 80-something-year-old parents who have now become very fluent in using pretty much every kind of video conferencing solution, even guiding my siblings on, oh no, the button's over here in the bottom right. Yeah, click there, you can share something. Just shows me how what I call forced familiarity is really not just driving people to these types of solutions, but getting people to the point where they go, gosh, you know what? This isn't so bad. I was resistant until I actually tried it. and it's creating other modalities that may start to emerge as more efficient, more productive, delivering better outcomes. And for businesses, realizing that as you have a workforce that's remote, these might be just better ways to engage.
Absolutely. It's we've always said, or I've always said that, right now, everyone that was ever on the edge, in regards to digital transformation or investing in sort of real-time technologies or visual engagement tools, it's like they've been thrust into it right now, right? There is no question anymore that you have to begin to utilize and leverage sort of these tools to not only engage and connect employees, but also engage with customers.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Are there some customer stories that you could speak to, whether it's pandemic related or not, that kind of, I always think bringing use cases to life really helps drive home the points as to where was an organization or an individual before, and then where were they now, and how has this technology enabled them to function more optimally and make their life easier? Do you have anything that's relatable in the realm of whether it's finance or healthcare that you could possibly break down for us?
Sure. One of my favorite use cases is when we talk about Intuit TurboTax. Intuit for years and still is a software company. They build tax software. They also make accounting software. But in the tax sense, they have built tax software and continued to try to find ways to make it more easily consumable to the end user. They started off with getting the CD-ROM that you would load onto your computer. Then they came out with an online version that then morphed into actually having a digital app that you could capture images of your W-2 and other financial documentation to upload. And they supported these people through this process. People would call up and why was taxes such a great area to focus? Well, one, you don't have a lot of repetition. You never become an expert because you do taxes once a year. And each year, the tax code seems to change just enough to give you that sort of pause of like, do I really know how to do this? Do I know the answer to this? And they're providing that level of support to those people who are calling in and asking questions. And their goal of supporting their customers more from, hey, this is something that we're doing from a support standpoint, and they engaged Glance to help their end users, connect with their tax specialists to be able to see exactly, because someone would say, I'm on this page, and they'd be like, well, can I see that? And by using some of the visual engagement tools, they were able to bring people together to see exactly what was going on. They also started to weave in things like live video feeds, which could suddenly de-escalate, because you can imagine how often do people get frustrated around their finances. So people are calling in, the video gave them that opportunity to de-escalate the call and get them through that process. And as they started to, this journey of adding some of this technology and solutions into how they supported their customers, they started getting responses from people going, gosh, I feel like I've got a tax bill on my shoulders. This is such a great experience. Hey, could someone actually do my taxes for me? Could someone just give me a quick review of my taxes, make sure I didn't leave anything on the table? And it really started to move TurboTax down the path of creating a solution that was able to deliver that expertise on demand, where right out of the gate, they saw higher completion rates, increased transactional NPS scores. But when they started to suddenly say, hey, what if we actually were able to sell advice and guidance and consultation? And they launched TurboTax Live, really not just as a way to support their customers, but this was a product line extension to drive and grow additional revenue. So here their primary source of revenue is selling software. You pay X number of dollars for the software. Oh, you need the state one too. Here's the extra cost. Now they could sit there and say, and if you want someone to actually help you do it or do your taxes for you, we have a certified EA or a CPA who can do that. And suddenly that whole solution blew up, because now they went from a software company delivering software and trying to find effective ways to supporting it to creating a whole new business line and new revenue opportunity to continue to grow the business. And so now when you think about TurboTax, you think about great software, but you also think about a great service experience, because you can now have both things together, not just a great product, but also the right support and maybe the right expertise that you can buy to get your taxes done. And that to me is like one of the best stories that we have, to be able to show how a company has evolved from that basic support all the way to creating a new revenue line to take to market to really benefit customers.
That's a great point there, Tom. And as we talk about some of the customer things and even just the internal employee things, obviously just in the past few months, so much has changed, right? And so as we talk about the impact on customers and even your own employees, what are some of the lessons learned and how has that evolved your guidance and best practice internally and for customers, especially as the dynamics are changing with the employee relationship, work culture, and the customer relationship right now?
Uh, um, these have been so important for us to be able to not just say, hey, we can deliver these types of things, but to be part of some of these solutions that have really been, I don't want to say customly built, but you really think about these workflows that companies are trying to build, and you're still using the same visual engagement technology, but they're really trying to sit there and understand, what is the customer journey? Where's the customer starting? Where do we want them to end? What are the key things inside there? And so when you think about what that journey looks like, they're also the part that we've really started to lean in on and really understand is there's two sides to this journey. There's the customer side of the journey. There's also the employee or the advisor side of the journey. And we want to make sure that we have covered both sides, because so much of when we think about CX, we're always talking about the customer experience versus what about the employee experience?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that when you have happy employees, when you have engaged employees, they deliver absolutely the best service possible. And so we're trying to take a look at it as we think about what this entire ecosystem is how do we support the employee, that agent advisor who's going to be supporting the customer? How does the tools and technology get built so that we're making sure that it's intuitive, that it's built into work streams, it's integrated into existing systems so they don't have to do swivel chair, how these start to impact the types of people that you're able to hire, retention rates, turnover, training. These are all things that suddenly get impacted because especially when you think about in contact centers that are highly transactional, there's a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
When you get into more complex, more technical, and you're thinking about a financial advisor, they're not going to necessarily be experts on technology. So you want to be able to weave some of these things in to sit there and say, oh, Dave, I see you're online. Why don't I guide you through this? And you have simple ways to be able to do things inside of an application to not just improve the customer experience, but really be mindful of what that employee side looks as well.
I think this also edges on an interesting concern and also development that some people have around the whole notion of automation, and that to what extent does the customer experience begin and end, and then where is it appropriate to hand off to an automated engine and a system that can guide you through without sacrificing someone's time that could be better repurposed to actual personalized care? How does Glance go about balancing that kind of delicate conundrum?
It's definitely a balance, but it starts with really understanding what the customer journey looks like. And if you looked at a mortgage application that someone might do, most often people are going to be, because of what we now have at our fingertips, the ability to do a lot of research. They can go online, they can check out a lot of different stuff, and you may end up at a mortgage broker or a bank's website where you're going to suddenly be engaged with a lot of different digital tools. There could be a bot, there could be a calculator, there could be a monthly estimator, there could be a pre-qualification tool, a comparison tool, a large FAQ that's going to give you lots of information, so that as a consumer, you're now in that educational phase, that ideation phase of like, well, what can I afford? What does my monthly payment look like? And these are all designed to empower that end user to be able to get them down the funnel to say, hey, I think I do want to apply for a mortgage. And you get them to the apply button, but that once you leave that step, and start to go into the actual application process, you suddenly have a level of complexity. Suddenly, maybe the emotional level is starting to rise. Like, oh, do I really want to do this? Is this going to be the right thing? Do I want to be locked in? And so many times in many transactions, when you have people who don't have the ability to really understand alternatives, can't necessarily demystify fees, when the transaction is a long time, like I'm committing to a 15-year mortgage or a 30-year mortgage, and I'm going to be spending a lot of money. This is where having that human element and knowing that inside that workflow, you could say, hey, we know that this is the spot when people are going to abandon and navigate off. Let's make sure that we weave in that opportunity to connect in, real time, to be able to drop that level of expertise into that workflow, to answer those questions, to say, hey, Nicki, this is going to work out. You're going to have a great life. You're going to get into the house that you want, answer some of these questions, demystify those types of fees, and get them to the actual submit button. We've seen many banks who have gone heavy on the digital side, only to find out that their conversion rate really hasn't changed. So they get more people doing all the tooling and figuring out what they can afford. Then they start the application process. They get stuck at the same spot and they abandon off. And what they're really trying to do is, like, we want to get the conversion rate improved. So not only are we doing the stuff on the early part of the funnel to guide people into the application process, but we're now weaving in the right human elements to be able to guide people, answer those questions, be empathetic, be a trusted advisor to them to get them to the submit button.
Thanks, Tom. And to me, it seems like Glance was born for such a time as this, right? As we talk about what's needed now from a CS perspective, customer engagement. How do you? I'm sure you're probably seeing interest and usage increase now. How are you sort of talking to and providing guidance along the areas of security?
Security is something that I think there's maybe a momentary lapse where security has been thrown out the window because people have many companies have been in that break the glass, grab the hose, and fight the fire. But we focus in industries where privacy and security is really critical. It's top of mind, and you think about healthcare, insurance, financial services, etc. And privacy and security, it's been deeply ingrained into who we are, what we build, and how we build it. You see in other competitors, sometimes there's a focus on really just simply allowing people to jump into a meeting quickly, participate. But unfortunately, what happens is when it is an afterthought, when it is a very simplistic view of how things are done, you really end up with lots of issues and problems. And so we have built a solution that allows for companies to be able to connect our technology, that allows their protocols, their policies and permissions to drive how people use it. We have things that allow for elements on a page, whether you're in a mobile application or online, to be able to mask certain fields so that maybe an advisor, they don't want them to see a social security number or a credit card number, whatever it might be. But being able to imply and have a security and privacy model that a company can control, that they can administer and roll out so that it meets their requirements, is something that we've always felt is the most important piece, and one of the big differentiators in how solutions like this should work versus just, hey, let's just see what's going to happen and hope that we don't have any problems.
And I think the delicate balance between the security and the importance of security that you spoke of, as well as the integration of the flexibility, is incredibly critical here, and what a lot of organizations and people are striving when they're faced with all this whole range of options. Now we have no choice. We're not, like I said earlier, we're not dipping our toes in the water, but what do we choose? What type of organization we choose? And I think the ones that are safe and secure, as well as ones that are flexible and also can offer that customized type of experience, really resound and kind of span both those two very important points. So I think that's very important, those aspects that you brought up.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I've heard many people say, "Oh, we're just going to run with this the way it is." It's important to recognize that anytime when, especially here we are in a pandemic, people are going to make the best choice they can at the moment they can and have to. But as things like the dust starts to settle, we're going to revert back to some of the important things, like privacy and security are really important. And they're important to not just businesses from a regulatory and compliance, but they're important to consumers as well, because we have so much of our our information out in the public domain. There's all kinds of things that people have experienced, from credit card fraud and all kinds of other fraud, that it's an important top of mind issue for many people.
Absolutely, and it's funny that as we're sort of going through this time with the pandemic, how do you see, for one, customer relationships, dynamics, being changed, and even the final question from that is, where do we go from here?
I'm a big believer that if you want to really think of what you're doing as servicing your customers. This isn't about competing on product, feature, or price, but you're really trying to say, what's going to help differentiate us? What are the things that we actually want to be able to provide our customers? We don't want to just give them the best product, but we want to make our customers, we have an intention to make our customers the most proficient at using this solution or product that we've got. And so we want to be able to weave some of these things together. And you look at how companies are trying to build engagement solutions. I think using the customer mindset, really focusing on what people are using on a regular basis in their daily lives. And you think about consumer internet companies that have really made things super simple. I think it's really an important piece to look at what some of these trends are. We can always talk about things like Amazon One-Click and how they've influenced consumers' expectations of really a simplified checkout experience, or Robinhood, that has really taken a complex system of regulation, financial institutions, assets, and really brought it down to a simple view that can be really daunting for a newcomer.
Yeah.
And I think of the part which is many people will say, well, B2C is so much easier. B2B is much more complicated. Well, that might be true, but the companies that are really starting to figure this thing out are trying to take a look at, how do I really simplify, use some of the elements that maybe B2C companies are using, really start to think about what these use cases, customer journeys look like, so that they can figure out how to win more customers. And the design of the customer experience and the simplification of it may be the way to do it.
No, absolutely, and I love that you keep coming back to the human element in all of this, and I think it's something that we need to pivot on, right, and really anchor around when we're talking about these topics, whether it be engagement, CX, and what have you, customer journeys. It's the customer's journey, right? It's their experience. I've always said, once again, Tom, any final thoughts for our listeners today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I think we've all benefited so much from the advent of so many different digital tools and technology. And like any good recipe, you realize that it's a balance of weaving in the right human element with the right digital tools to be able to meet the customers wherever they are on any device, and to recognize that you want to be able to meet them inside of your experience. You don't want them to have to do lots of extra things. So thinking about the customer, looking at it from their perspective, and recognizing that the best solution is going to weave the right digital and human elements together to get the best outcome and the best experience.
I was just going to say, that really resonates me, that the notion of tools, technology, and people, or that terminology was always kind of like an eye roll one in the past whenever I would put together like a deck for a consulting project, and they were kind of the primary go-to pillars. And now I look back and I think, well, they truly were foundational pillars, and we're living and breathing them every single day. And so when you can kind of join them in this real life and relatable way, Tom, and with the solutions like Glance offers, I think that will certainly resonate with anyone who has had the opportunity to listen and has certainly, helped Dave and I close out the loop on the series of other guests that we've had here. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome, Nicki. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you, Dave.
Yes, thank you so much, Tom. It's a timely topic, and what I will say is that we definitely have to have you come back because this is such a pivotal theme. As Nicki and I are going to be doing a sort of a recap podcast. So this is one of the main themes I think that we have to bring up, and also I think a future podcast will definitely have to have you come back to go a little further in depth on some of the things that Glance is doing, for digital engagement and so forth.
That's great. I'd love to come back and join you in that conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
All right.
Thanks. Take care.
All right. Take care.